everyone. I'm Zina Bribua, and welcome back to Beyond the Ideological. I want to just step back for a moment and first of all look at the world we're living in, but also talk about one of the pieces I wrote recently, and it's that we're entering a new Cold War. Because I believed, and I don't say this lightly, I think we're already in a new Cold War. It's not really, I think, a future possibility. I think it's happening right now. And it's interesting because in the United States, many don't grasp, I think, the scale of the upcoming confrontation and of the current confrontation. And what I am afraid of is that there are real risks of being overtaken by powers that are building what I believe is a rival order, an alternative global order to the one that the United States was building since really the end of the Cold War. And this is happening right under our nose. And I really thought, why not talk about, the piece I wrote and break down how the players are playing and what I think this means for America's future. First of all, I just wanted to talk also about this book that a colleague of mine, it's called, a colleague of mine gave me to read, and it's called More Precious Than Peace by Peter Rodman. And here's why I loved reading this book, because it explained the peripheries of the Cold War, um, what basically happened during the Cold War in a third world. And it does have a lot of what Stalin was doing, what he was thinking, whenever it came to seizing opportunities in Africa, in Asia and elsewhere. And it just reminded me so much about the current Putin policy in Africa. I work a lot on Russia and China and Middle East, Africa, Sahel, and this was such a helpful book. Anyway, I thought why not recommend it. Maybe some of you will find it very interesting. I think the edition is let me check. Edition 1994. Peter Rodman. Very, very, very great book. I absolutely recommend it. It really just opened my eyes to what I'm going to say now. Um, so maybe you saw when you received an email from me that I was talking about a new Cold War coming and that we're already in one. I think that there are several debates in Washington about the multipolarity, are we in a unipolar moment, blah blah blah. I think these are good debates, but they don't talk about what is going on. And in a sense that what is what is going on is that you have the United States really being challenged by what many consider is China, but it's an ecosystem of China, an ecosystem of Russia, an ecosystem of Iran. Why? Because the crises that are happening across the world, whether in Ukraine, Taiwan, and elsewhere, I do not see these as isolated crises because there is a consolidation of what I said earlier, an alternative order. Um, the what is emerging is really a systematic structural confrontation, and I think that the evidence is really everywhere. Because unlike the Cold War of 20th century, the current contest is not really just about nuclear standoffs and having military alliances. You can see that the current contest is across all domains. Domains meaning like artificial intelligence, biotech, critical minerals, energy corridors, and also over strategic choke points, which is why the Russians are not just in Ukraine. Russians are also in Africa. They're also in the Sahel. They're thinking about Equatorial Guinea. They're thinking about Sudan. And I think that this is where I believe there's a deeper struggle that is coming. Um, and that the United States, instead of seeing the link between these what are considered disconnected crises, we should look more at them as really connected, because there is what I considered a real adversarial convergence, in a sense that, I mean, let's take one by one. Russia, China, and Iran. Of course, there are many people, a lot of experts will definitely tell you, oh, by the way, the Russians and the Chinese, they always had problems. They have current problems. There are problems on the borders. They don't trust each other. Same on Iran and Russia. They don't trust each other. There's this history, etc. It's true. I do not deny any of that. I think that is very true. However, because Russia has great ambitions in Europe, because China has great ambitions in Asia, but also global ambitions, because Iran has ideological but also revolutionary ambitions, they understand that to achieve their ambitions, they cannot do so with a strong United States. It's impossible. Their interests at the end of the day do join when it comes to forming a coherent anti-US hegemonic project. So the Russians, let's take the Russians first. They made clear that Ukraine is not really just about territory. Having parts of Ukraine will not solve their will not satisfy them, because the goal is to actually break Europe's security order. It's to prove that NATO is brittle. This is why I think they are expanding their influence in Africa, also in the Middle East. Despite Assad being gone from Syria, they are still trying to find partnerships, because being in the Eastern Mediterranean is very important for the Russians. They are partnering with China when it comes to alternative financial mechanisms, because the sanctions are hitting them very hard. They've collaborated with Iran on drone warfare. And so here you can see how the Russians, they have ambition, they have goals, but they find Beijing and Tehran as good, reliable partners in this. And the same goes for North Korea. Now let's take China. China was casting, I think, itself since really the early 2000s as this natural successor to global leadership. They really talk very often about the end of liberalism, which actually means United States, decline of the United States, the decline of the West, the global South being this new orbit, that China is only rising, and that the CCP needs to take advantage of every single strategic mistake the United States makes, so that China takes the lead in important spheres. And the Chinese, of course, understand that they can't do that alone, which is why the Russians are important in Eurasia, which is why Iran is very important in the Middle East. Now let's take Iran for a second. Iran is very small, smaller in scale when it comes to, comparing them to Russia and China. Very different, as well in terms of ambition. It's a revolutionary regime. They believe that the revolution needs to go across the board. It needs to be embraced, and therefore for years, for decades, they've perfected tools of sanction evasion, tools of proxy warfare. They understand how to take advantage of every single disruption that happens in the Middle East. They are masters when it comes to smuggling networks. They developed the drone industries, which is helping Russia and China, but is also helping them when it comes to building their own capabilities. And and this is where you find the link between Iran, China, and Russia, in a sense that they have an alignment. They are aligned when it comes to taking advantage of every single crisis to undermine the United States. I think that this is the current framework. This is how they are working. I think that this is what they're saying openly. Xi Jinping talks about bigger, wider cooperation with Russia, wider cooperation with Iran. Every single one of them, Putin or Khamenei talk about that. And the problem that the United States faces is that there is, I think there's in foreign policy circle a certain sense of comfort that the economy and economic interdependence is the one that guarantees stability, that liberalism triumphed, and then there's the end of ideological competition. um, and I think that this is fundamentally misleading. I do think that there is also an ideological competition, and the ideological competition is defined by being anti-US. And that this is something that the Russians understand, this is something that Chinese understand, what the Iranians understand. Of course, not necessarily their people, but the regimes do. And for the United States, therefore, the decisive battlefield is not, it's not just Taiwan, it's not just Donbass, it's not Strait of Hormuz, it's everything. Why? Because that's how the United States functions. It functions through projection of power by also making sure that its own companies, American companies, which are global, function function well. That allies, whether in Europe, Latin America, Africa, Asia, understand the importance of the United States when it comes to military power, but also economic power. Economic power is very important here. Maybe in the next video I'll talk about the BRICS, but this is I think where the stakes are. That actually we're entering a phase where losing in one part of the world will have huge repercussions elsewhere. Um, and I think that the issue, of course, is that I think that there is a mismatch between what is going on, what people think, and what people think. I think the current society, I mean, the American society, the Western society, is actually unprepared for the next strategic competition, for the current strategic competition. I think Ukraine did something, and I think that people are waking up to what is going on. But I think that the challenge is getting bigger. And I think that this is really the paradox of the current new Cold War, is that externally, the United States is confronting adversaries that have some sort of strategic coherence. They don't necessarily coordinate together, but they do benefit from each other's success. And, and this is where I think the paradox is that internally, the United States is paralyzed because of divisions, but also because of distractions, also because Americans have to also take care of domestic policies. The United States, in terms of energy policy and other things, very important. There were a lot of failures from other administrations, and now they have to repair a lot of it. But also there is a paralysis from the assumption that the time is on America's side. But I think that the more certain theaters are being neglected, the less it is going to be the case. So I think that this is where the paradox is when it comes to understanding this new Cold War, because it's very hard for the American public to understand this, in the sense that they're massive failures in terms of foreign policy, from the Iraq War, Iraq invasion, from the Afghanistan withdrawal, from all of these things. The American public is less inclined to to not just to listen, but also to even want to understand, because there is a huge distrust. And I think that this is going to be the challenge for US leaders, either now or in the future, to explain the problem, to have strategic clarity at the elite level, um, and also to explain strategic clarity to the wider public. Because otherwise, the United States can do every single policy in the book and repair it, but if people are unprepared for mobilization, for endurance, etc., you actually lose in this new Cold War, because this new Cold War is very different. There's a lot of hybrid warfare, a lot of disinformation, a lot of rule and divide, through social media, through other networks. And I think that this is a really important question. And I think the next and this and, I mean, not just the next decade, but also in just the next few years. And so this is why I wrote that article. I thought that I genuinely believe that we're entering a very, very dangerous phase in great power competition. The what I think Ukraine showed is that you can have Russia challenging another country over territory, but fundamentally Russia is also challenging a system. And because they are challenging a system, which is the NATO one, the NATO framework, the US allies, they are also building their own alliance, not alliance in the traditional sense, but the partnerships they have with North Korea, with Iran, with China, are proving that there is as a real need for them to build an international order so that they can do whatever they want to do without having US, whether they have US approval or not. Weakening the United States is absolutely important for them to achieve their ambitions. Um, and this is why, of course, I emphasize it again. I think that the architecture of power globally is being tested. And I think that we are entering a new Cold War. So yeah, this is basically what I thought was interesting. What I spent a lot of my time thinking about. Well, I'm Zina Bribua, and this has been Beyond the Ideological. Thank you for listening.